So once you understand how, when you start speaking about spiritual warfare, your luck is usually an indicator of whether your forces are operational or not. I always like to say, guys, that if you're trying to find spiritual stuff, if you're trying to find spiritual situations, in my own journey, in my own life experiences, one thing that I noticed is that most spiritual things are either at the bottom of society or at the very top of society, because what you have to understand is that usually it's where people are poor, where there is desperation, where there is all these sorts of mental spaces. When you're in a difficult spot, usually your mind is in a state of confusion, and you might find yourself being suggestible to do things like crime, etc., etc., etc. So poverty breeds crime. Hardship, desperation breeds crime. So if you can get more people to be more poor, then you can create more crime, more danger, more, because obviously evil spirits, evil intent is bred off of desperation, poverty, etc., etc., etc. It's rare, not rare, but not everyone would just do crime if they had enough to survive, if they had means or ways to get money in a way that didn't involve crime. So you'd find spiritual stuff usually at the bottom, because when people get cursed, when people get witched, when certain things happen to people, victims of spiritual attacks, usually you find them on the side of the road. People who got done some spiritual ritual or some thing that happened to them that caused them to lose everything that they have, so now they're on the side of the road because their lack of luck. So you'd find those people at the bottom of society. You'd find people who've had things stolen from them at the bottom of society, and those people become desperate, and you'd find that there would be more crime, more desperation, more hardship in those places. So it's easier to find demonic activity in lower class most of the time because of that aspect of it, because of the aspect of demons need hosts in order to thrive. Ill intent needs a person in order for it to fulfill itself. Jealousy can only be bred by people. Jealousy needs people in order for it to carry out its will. Lust needs people in order for it to carry out its will. Greed needs people in order for it to be carried out. Therefore, you have to understand that greed as the entity, greed as the ill intent, is what I'm trying to explain to you guys as these spiritual forces that have the ability to change your life. Someone may become jealous of you, and that jealousy would be the reason that they try to do some spiritual thing on you. At the highest levels of greed are people who kill people for money, are people who steal children for money, are people who do evil actions, evil intentful actions, ill intent on people, because they want more money. So greed is the vessel that is being used to, have to cause ill intent on someone else's life, because now someone has to suffer, the sacrifice in order for that greed's will to take place. So you'll find that at the top, very, very top of society would be where there's spiritual activity, and at the bottom is where there's spiritual activity, because those areas are full of opportunity for, these mental spaces that I'm speaking of to thrive. When you're angry, when you're poor, when you're, always, fighting for your life, when you're desperate, those things will cause your mind to start getting ideas, So in this understanding of good luck and bad luck that I've been trying to speak of, you have to understand yourself, like a business. You have to look at yourself and your plans like a business that is going towards a goal. Let's say maybe you are an actor, or maybe let's say a public speaker. If I'm a business that does public speaking, what are my assets? What are the things that I need in order to survive? What do I do on a regular basis in order for me to keep this dream going? Because that's the business, me, and one of my assets would be my voice. you know. So that means spiritually, someone would do some attack, spiritual attack. Maybe they see you speaking on TV, maybe they see you speaking on radio, and that's incited jealousy in them. And that jealousy is now causing them to attempt to do something with ill intent towards you. Maybe they're going to attack your voice in one way or another. You know, why specifically attack your voice? You know, this is where I'm trying to say that spiritual warfare is the process of you now having a throat infection just before a very important interview. You know, just before you're meant to go for that big break, for that big situation, you know, your voice all of a sudden doesn't work anymore. You start getting a throat infection. Now you're unable to speak properly for the next 30 days or so. You know, that would have been a spiritual attack against what your business is trying to achieve, which is to be a public speaker. And then you can clearly understand why I'm trying to say it becomes a spiritual attack, because you can see how targeted this circumstance would have been in your situation, you know. And I don't want you guys to always think of bad luck, you know, you not getting the job, something blocking you from getting into the relationship that you wanted. I don't want you guys to always see it in a negative way. You know, sometimes God is protecting you from something and the situation stops you from getting into something that you thought was good for you, but it was actually bad for you. But like I said, it's about prayer, you know, prayer and faith. You know, when you believe in God, when you believe in a higher power, then you have to understand that even though you are making decisions, sometimes you can make poor or bad decisions. You know, sometimes you can allow yourself to be in a situation where someone who has ill intent is able to do whatever they want to do towards you because you are unable to read the signs, because you are unable to see it coming. You know, so that is what then the prayer that you use in spiritual warfare is meant to protect you from. You know, all the things that you can see and that you can't see. You know, so this is important for you to understand what I'm trying to say, that you have to be able to view yourself as a business. And, you know, if there is something financing that business, maybe you know, have a job or whatever it is that is supplying into this dream of yours, this goal of yours, and that whatever's been financing you is cut off, that can be a form of an attack on your goal, on your business, you know. So the spiritual side of it is that you have vital points in your life. You know, for some of you, even you're married, some of you are in relationships, and people who are against that, forces that are against that, that you may not be aware of, might be trying to take those things away from you. Maybe you got married, you know, and now someone is now trying to break your marriage up by creating situations, circumstances, bad luck in your situation, in your relationship, in whatever it is that you're in order to separate you guys, because if you guys are separate, you guys are unable to function and they win, you know. So when you see yourself as, you know, a business, an asset, a system, and you understand that there are forces that are trying to come into that business, that are trying to hinder you from reaching your goals, that may even be your family members, your cousins, your whatever it may be, then you're starting to understand